by Kelly Mass. Summaries from History. Chapter 1. What happened during the Age of Discovery? The epoch, often referred to as the Age of Discovery, alternatively known as the Age of Exploration, characterizes a pivotal era spanning the transition from the 15th century to the 18th century in European history. It was a time brimming with maritime expeditions led by intrepid European sailors, venturing into uncharted territories across the globe. Foremost among these adventurers were the Portuguese and Spanish, whose expansive voyages overseas left an indelible mark on European culture. Notably, their encounters with and subsequent colonization of the Americas signified a profound shift in global dynamics. This era also witnessed the ascendancy of colonialism as a prevailing governmental doctrine in various European realms, earning it the moniker of the inaugural wave of European colonization. The dawn of European exploration can be traced back to Portugal's ventures beyond the confines of the Mediterranean, with their pioneering expeditions to the Canary Islands in 1336 marking a significant turning point. Subsequent milestones include the Portuguese annexation of the Atlantic islands of Madeira and Azores in 1419 and 1427 respectively. This was followed by extensive explorations along the West African coastline, culminating in Vasco da Gama's groundbreaking establishment of a maritime route to India in 1498. Meanwhile, under the sponsorship of the Crown of Castile, Spain, Christopher Columbus embarked on his epical transatlantic voyages between 1492 and 1504, initiating the European colonization of the Americas. Ferdinand Magellan, with Juan Sebastián Elcano completing his expedition, achieved the first circumnavigation of the globe from 1519 to 1522. These endeavors, spanning across the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, alongside terrestrial expeditions across continents, continued well into the late 19th century, succeeded by polar exploration in the 20th century. The consequential mingling of the Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the New World, the Americas and Australia, gave rise to the Columbian Exchange, a profound exchange encompassing flora, fauna, sustenance, human migrations, including forced labor, diseases, and cultural exchanges between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. This epoch of exploration and subsequent encounters fundamentally reshaped the global cartography, fostering a newfound global consciousness and the convergence of divergent civilizations. Concurrently, the inadvertent transmission of diseases wrought devastation upon indigenous populations, notably the Native Americans. The age was also characterized by the scourges of slavery, exploitation, military conquests, and the pervasive dissemination of European culture and technology, catalyzed by Europe and its colonies, impacting indigenous societies worldwide. In 1418, backed by the patronage of Infante Dom Henrique, the Portuguese commenced systematic exploration of the African coastline, spearheaded by the visionary Prince Henry. Their breakthrough came with the introduction of the nimble and versatile caravel, a groundbreaking vessel engineered for extended voyages, propelled by the innovative command of Henry the Navigator. This technological marvel facilitated Bartholomew Dias's landmark journey to the Indian Ocean in 1488, further expanding the horizons of European exploration. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs of Castile and Aragon threw their support behind Christopher Columbus, the Genoese navigator, in his bold quest to chart a westerly course across the Atlantic in search of the fabled Indies. Columbus's voyage led him to stumble upon a land unseen by most Europeans, although the Norse had briefly ventured there some 5 centuries earlier. This newfound land, initially dubbed America after the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, was envisioned as a new continent. To prevent conflict between Portugal and Castile, under whose auspices Columbus sailed, 4 papal decrees were issued, dividing the world into separate spheres of exploration, each with exclusive rights to lay claim to newly discovered territories. However, the Treaty of Tordesillas, ratified by Pope Julius II, later revised these arrangements. In 1498, Vasco da Gama spearheaded a Portuguese expedition that circumnavigated Africa, opening up direct trade routes with India and Asia. Concurrently, Portuguese exploration fleets ventured toward northern North America, while the Portuguese India armadas charted islands across the South Atlantic and southern Indian Oceans. This maritime expansion facilitated intermittent landings in South America, forging a circuitous route connecting the New World to Asia, initiated in 1500 by Pedro Álvares Cabral. Pushing further eastward, Portuguese explorers reached the lucrative Spice Islands in 1512 and made landfall in China a year later. Japan remained elusive until 1543 when Portuguese explorers first set foot on its shores. Spaniard Vasco Núñez de Balboa achieved a significant milestone in 1513 by crossing the Isthmus of Panama, thereby reaching the Pacific Ocean from the New World. News of these far-flung exploits reverberated across Europe, heralding the discovery of the eastern and western reaches of the Pacific Ocean. In 1522, a Castilian expedition led by Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan, later succeeded by Spanish Basque navigator Juan Sebastián Elcano, accomplished the world's first circumnavigation, charting a westward course. Concurrently, Spanish conquistadors delved into the heartland of the Americas and later explored the South Pacific archipelagos. The advent of these voyages in 1495 spurred the French, English, and Dutch to vie for supremacy in exploration, challenging the Iberian dominance over maritime trade. Their endeavors led to pioneering expeditions along the western coasts of North and South America, epitomized by John Cabot's inaugural English expedition in 1497 and subsequent French voyages to both South and North America. Meanwhile, Russian explorers embarked on an ambitious conquest of Siberia from the 1580s to the 1640s, extending their reach to Alaska by the 1730s. Europe was largely overshadowed by the flourishing Arab civilization following Rome's decline, which severed many of Europe's connections to lands farther east. The Arabs rapidly conquered and absorbed vast territories across the Middle East and North Africa. Although the Christian Crusades aimed at reclaiming the Holy Land proved militarily unsuccessful, they facilitated Europe's exposure to the Middle East and its coveted commodities. The interlinking of maritime and river trade routes in the 12th century ushered in an economic revolution for Europe, prompting the establishment of commercial networks. Prior to the 12th century, Muslim domination of extensive regions, including the Iberian Peninsula, coupled with the trade monopolies held by Christian city-states like Venice and Genoa in Italy, severely impeded trade eastward from the Strait of Gibraltar, separating the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean. The Christian reconquest of Al-Andalus in present-day southern Spain and the Siege of Lisbon in 1147 catalyzed economic growth in the Iberian region. The waning naval prowess of the Fatimid Caliphate preceding the First Crusade enabled the Italian maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa to gain control over eastern Mediterranean trade, enriching merchants and augmenting their political influence. The decline of Byzantine naval power following Emperor Manuel I Comneno's demise in 1180, whose dynasty had forged notable treaties and concessions with Italian traders, permitting access to Byzantine Christian ports, further altered the mercantile landscape in the eastern Mediterranean. The Norman conquest of England in the late 11th century facilitated peaceful commerce on the North Sea. The Hanseatic League, a confederation of merchant guilds and their towns around the North and Baltic Seas in northern Germany, played a pivotal role in the region's commercial development. Flanders, Hainaut, and Brabant produced northern Europe's finest textiles in the 12th century, attracting Genoese and Venetian merchants to voyage directly from the Mediterranean, traversing the Strait of Gibraltar and along the Atlantic coast. In 1277, Nicolò Spinola embarked on the first direct voyage from Genoa to Flanders. Chapter 2: Chinese Trading Routes. In the waning years of the Middle Ages, a succession of overland journeys crisscrossing Eurasia laid the groundwork for what would later be known as the Age of Discovery. The looming threat of Mongol incursions into Europe notwithstanding, their expansive dominion over much of Eurasia ushered in an era of relative peace, known as the Pax Mongolica, from 1206 to 1214. This period of tranquility facilitated the establishment of secure trade routes and communication networks stretching from the Middle East to China. Seizing this opportunity, numerous Europeans embarked on expeditions eastward, with Italians predominantly leading the way, owing to the dominance of maritime republics in mediating trade between Europe and the Middle East. The intricate web of Italian commercial ties with the Levant captured the curiosity of Eastern nations, spurring further exploration and interaction. Amid the late medieval milieu, sporadic accounts emerge of North African and Mediterranean merchants engaging in commerce within the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, underscoring the burgeoning intercontinental trade networks of the time. Amid the tumult of Mongol invasions in the Levant, Christian emissaries ventured as far as Karakorum, the Mongol capital, seeking insights into the distant lands beyond. Notably, from 1241 to 1247, Pope Innocent IV dispatched Giovanni da Pian del Carpine on a mission to the Great Khan, an arduous journey that took him to the heart of Mongolia and back. Concurrently, Russian Prince Yaroslav of Vladimir and his progeny, including Alexander Nevsky and Andrei II of Vladimir, undertook diplomatic missions to the Mongol capital, leaving behind enigmatic accounts that bore significant geopolitical ramifications. Meanwhile, intrepid travelers like the Frenchman André de Longjumeau and the Flemish adventurer William of Rubric ventured across Central Asia in pursuit of China, contributing to the growing body of knowledge about the far-flung reaches of the continent. Perhaps most renowned among these early explorers was Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant whose epic journey from 1271 to 1295 yielded a captivating account of his sojourn at the court of Kublai Khan during the Yuan dynasty. His narrative, chronicled in Travels, captivated the imaginations of Europeans and fueled a burgeoning interest in distant lands and cultures across the continent. In 1291, Genoese forces achieved a decisive victory over a Muslim fleet patrolling the strategic Gibraltar Strait, asserting their maritime prowess in the Mediterranean. That same year, brothers Vidino and Ugolino Vivaldi embarked on a fateful voyage from Genoa with 2 galleys, only to mysteriously vanish along the coast of Morocco, underscoring the perilous nature of oceanic travel during that era. During the 14th century, Ibn Battuta, a distinguished Moroccan scholar hailing from Tangier, embarked on an unparalleled journey spanning vast swaths of North Africa, the Sahara Desert, West Africa, Southern and Eastern Europe, the Horn of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, culminating in his arrival in China. His monumental account of these travels, known as the Rilla or the Journey, stands as a seminal text detailing his remarkable adventures. Concurrently, the fantastical tales recounted in John Mandeville's popular work captivated the imagination of readers, despite their often embellished and erroneous nature, perpetuating the notion of Jerusalem as the center of the universe. In the wake of the Timurid era, accounts of cross-continental journeys emerged, such as Nikhil de Kanti's narrative of his exploits as a Muslim merchant in India and Southeast Asia in 1439, and the chronicle of Russian merchant Afanasy Nikitin's voyage to India between 1466 and 1472, chronicled in his book, A Journey Beyond the Three Seas. However, the immediate impact of these transcontinental travels was relatively minor. The swift collapse of the Mongol Empire and the ravages of the 14th century Black Death hindered further exploration and commerce, while the rise of the Ottoman Empire further restricted European overland trade routes. Despite China's long-standing trading relations in Asia since the Tang dynasty, the Ming Emperor Yongg's ambitious tribute missions in the Indian Ocean between 1405 and 1421, led by Admiral Zheng He, Cheng Ho, failed to establish enduring connections with external regions due to China's subsequent shift towards isolationism, despite their significant historical importance. In preparation for diplomatic voyages to distant lands, an expansive fleet of state-of-the-art junk ships was meticulously constructed. Among these vessels were the renowned Baochuan, or treasure ships, renowned for their vast size and capacity, manned by thousands of sailors. The inaugural expedition set sail in the year 1405, marking the beginning of a series of at least 7 meticulously documented journeys. Each subsequent voyage surpassed its predecessor in scale and expenditure, traversing vast distances across the seas, from Arabia and East Africa to India, the Malay archipelago, and Thailand, known as Siam at the time. These maritime ventures facilitated a rich exchange of commodities, with cargoes ranging from ostriches, zebras, and camels to precious metals, porcelain, and luxurious silk. Under the indomitable leadership of Zheng He, the final expedition departed from Nanking in 1431, embarking on a grand odyssey that culminated in their triumphant return to Beijing in 1433. It is widely speculated that this ultimate mission may have extended as far as Madagascar, a testament to the audacious spirit of exploration that characterized these historic voyages. Chronicling these adventures was Ma Huan, a Muslim scholar and interpreter, who accompanied Zheng He on 3 of the 7 voyages, his first-hand account published as the Yingye Shenglan, providing invaluable insights into the maritime expeditions of the Ming era. The impact of these expeditions reverberated far beyond the shores they visited, fundamentally altering the landscape of maritime trade and diplomacy. They catalyzed the development of a sprawling network of maritime hubs and conduits, fostering unprecedented levels of international commerce and cultural exchange. Significantly, prior to these ventures, no single nation had asserted naval dominance over the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, positioning Ming China as a formidable maritime power. The Ming court strategically promoted the establishment of alternative trade nodes, elevating ports such as Malacca, Cochin, and Malindi as pivotal players in the global trade network, challenging the hegemony of established maritime centers. Moreover, these expeditions facilitated the regionalization of the Western Ocean and precipitated a surge in global migration, intellectual exchange, and trade flows. Ming treasure fleet ships served as vibrant forums for cosmopolitan discourse, fostering interactions between diverse cultures and fostering a sense of shared humanity across the maritime realm. For the first time in history, the vast maritime domain stretching from China to Africa fell under the auspices of a single imperial power, paving the way for the emergence of a cosmopolitan maritime order. However, the Ming dynasty's subsequent adoption of an isolationist maritime policy, known as Haijin, curtailed further maritime endeavors. Successive emperors, wary of the potential risks posed by prolonged maritime engagements, gradually withdrew from the expansive maritime network established by Zheng He's expeditions. The once thriving exchanges with distant lands dwindled as Ming China turned inward, ultimately marking the end of an era of maritime exploration and diplomacy. Chapter 3: Exploring the Atlantic Ocean. From the 8th to the 15th centuries, the Republic of Venice and neighboring maritime city-states held a virtual monopoly on European trade with the Middle East. This dominance over Mediterranean commerce brought immense wealth to these city-states, driven primarily by the lucrative silk and spice trade. These exotic goods, ranging from spices and incense to medicinal herbs and opium, were highly prized commodities in medieval Europe, sought after for their myriad uses in medicine, religious rituals, cosmetics, and culinary arts. Across the Indian Ocean, Muslim traders held sway over maritime routes, sourcing goods from the Far East and ferrying them to bustling trading hubs in India, notably Kozhikode, before venturing further westward to Ormuz in the Persian Gulf and Jeddah on the Red Sea coast. Overland trade routes then conveyed these coveted goods to the shores of the Mediterranean. Venetian merchants played a pivotal role in distributing these exotic products throughout Europe, facilitating their integration into European markets. However, the ascendancy of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent fall of Constantinople in 1453 dealt a severe blow to European access to vital trade routes, severing crucial land-sea connections and disrupting the flow of goods. Consequently, Venetian traders faced significant challenges in maintaining their commercial dominance in the face of shifting geopolitical dynamics. Amidst these changes, Genoese merchants adapted their trading activities, shifting their focus to the lucrative wheat and olive oil trade in North Africa, while also venturing in search of precious metals such as silver and gold. The scarcity of bullion in Europe, exacerbated by the one-way flow of coinage towards the east, prompted the establishment of sophisticated banking institutions to manage trade risks. Notably, the Banco di San Giorgio, founded in Genoa in 1407, emerged as one of the earliest state banks, symbolizing the growing financial sophistication of European trading centers. In contrast to the traditional practice of coastal navigation prevalent in Europe, where sailors relied on portolan charts delineating well-known maritime routes based on coastal landmarks, the dawn of oceanic exploration heralded a new era. Western European navigators embraced revolutionary advancements in cartography, astronomy, and navigation tools such as the compass, astrolabe, and quadrant, enabling them to undertake daring voyages across vast expanses of open sea. These pioneering expeditions marked a watershed moment in European maritime history, paving the way for unprecedented global exploration and trade. In 1297, King Dinis of Portugal took a keen interest in enhancing the nation's exports, signaling a pivotal shift towards maritime endeavors. Recognizing the importance of safeguarding Portuguese interests at sea, in 1317, he appointed Manuel Pessanha, a seasoned Genoese merchant sailor, as the inaugural admiral of the Portuguese fleet. Pessanha's primary mandate was to fortify Portugal's maritime defenses and repel incursions by Muslim pirates, thus safeguarding the nation's coastal territories. Amidst the upheavals of the 14th century, marked by devastating outbreaks of bubonic plague and widespread depopulation, the maritime domain emerged as a beacon of opportunity. With coastal regions offering refuge and economic prospects, a significant portion of the population gravitated towards maritime activities, particularly fishing and commerce. Building upon this maritime momentum, King Afonso IV of Portugal endorsed marine trade initiatives, greenlighting a series of pioneering explorations between 1325 and 1357. The strategic significance of maritime dominance became increasingly apparent, prompting European powers, spearheaded by the Portuguese, to assert control over Mediterranean trade routes. Employing a combination of military might and coercion, they sought to channel commerce through ports under their jurisdiction, enabling them to levy taxes and maintain a lucrative trade monopoly. In 1415, Portugal made a bold move by launching a military expedition to seize control of Ceuta, thereby asserting authority over navigation along the African coast. Among the expedition's participants was the youthful Prince Henry the Navigator, whose vision extended far beyond mere territorial conquest. Fascinated by the potential of trans-Saharan trade routes, Henry envisioned establishing direct maritime links with West Africa, tapping into centuries-old trade networks connecting the region with the Mediterranean. Driven by a desire to chart new sea routes and access lucrative markets, Henry spearheaded a series of ambitious maritime expeditions along the Mauritania coast. Collaborating with merchants, shipowners, and other stakeholders, he orchestrated voyages that led to the discovery of key Atlantic outposts, including Madeira in 1419 and the Azores in 1427. These ventures, guided by Prince Henry's navigational expertise, laid the groundwork for Portuguese colonization efforts in the Atlantic, exemplifying the pioneering spirit of maritime exploration during this era. During the era when Europeans embarked on maritime exploration, the mysteries beyond Cape Nan, also known as Cape Shonner on the African coast, loomed large. The prospect of venturing into uncharted waters filled sailors with uncertainty, as tales of sea monsters and the dreaded notion of reaching the edge of the world pervaded maritime folklore. However, Prince Henry the Navigator's unwavering determination to defy these myths marked a turning point in navigation history. His systematic approach to sailing, commencing in 1421, gradually dismantled the barriers of fear and superstition, culminating in the triumphant passage around the perilous Cape Bahadur by Gil Eanes in 1434. A pivotal innovation that facilitated further maritime exploration was the development of the caravel in the mid-15th century. These nimble vessels, renowned for their exceptional ability to sail against the wind, represented a significant leap forward in maritime technology. Unlike their predecessors, which were primarily used for coastal navigation, caravels were equipped to venture boldly across the Atlantic. Incorporating elements of fishing ship designs, they embodied the spirit of maritime innovation that fueled Europe's age of exploration. Fueling the success of these expeditions was the adoption of advanced navigational techniques. Celestial navigation, facilitated by tools such as the ephemerides, gained prominence during the 15th century. These astronomical charts, depicting the positions of stars over time, revolutionized navigation by enabling sailors to calculate latitude with greater precision. However, the challenge of determining longitude persisted, presenting a formidable obstacle to navigators. Undeterred by these challenges, systematic exploration propelled European voyages further southward. In 1445, Álvaro Fernández made significant strides, reaching the shores of Senegal and the Cape Verde Peninsula. The following year, his expedition ventured as far as present-day Sierra Leone, expanding European knowledge of the African coast. Meanwhile, geopolitical developments reshaped the landscape of maritime exploration. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 altered trade routes and heightened competition for control over lucrative markets in the East. Pope Nicholas V's issuance of the bull Romanus Pontifex in 1455 further entrenched Portugal's ambitions in overseas exploration, granting King Afonso V exclusive rights to lands and seas discovered beyond Cape Bahadur. This policy, known as Mare Clausum, solidified Portugal's position as a dominant maritime power and laid the groundwork for future expeditions. In pursuit of alternative routes to the east, King Afonso V commissioned the renowned Fra Mauro world map, underscoring the importance of cartographic expertise in shaping Europe's maritime endeavors. In 1456, Diogo Gomes made landfall in the Cape Verde archipelago, marking the beginning of Portuguese exploration in the region. Over the ensuing decade, several commanders, including Antonio da Noli and Alves Cadamosto, commissioned by Prince Henry, ventured forth to discover the remaining islands dotting the Atlantic. By the 1460s, their expeditions extended to the Gulf of Guinea, unveiling new horizons in West Africa. Around 1460, Pedro de Sintra reached the shores of Sierra Leone, adding to the growing body of geographical knowledge amassed by Portuguese explorers. However, Prince Henry's passing in November of that year temporarily hindered further exploration due to financial constraints. It wasn't until 1469 that Lisbon merchant Fernão Gomes, in exchange for a 5-year trade monopoly in the Gulf of Guinea, secured funding to continue the voyages. Supported by explorers such as Juan de Santarém and Pedro Escobar, they pushed the boundaries of exploration, reaching the southern hemisphere and discovering islands like São Tomé and Príncipe. In 1471, a pivotal naval battle near Elmina, during the War of the Castilian Succession, underscored Portuguese dominance in the Guinea trade and solidified their control over West African provinces. This marked the onset of European colonial conflicts, with Portugal emerging victorious and consolidating its hold over the region in the Treaty of Alcachovas of 1479. Under the reign of King Ju II, Portuguese expansion accelerated. In 1481, the São Jorge da Mina factory was established, serving as a pivotal trading post in West Africa. Further expeditions, led by explorers like Diogo Company and Bartolomeu Dias, pushed the boundaries of maritime exploration. Dias's circumnavigation of the southern tip of Africa in 1488, revealing the passage to the Indian Ocean, reshaped European perceptions of global geography. Simultaneously, Pero do Covala's clandestine overland journey to Ethiopia provided crucial insights into maritime routes to the Indies. This discovery, coupled with the optimism surrounding the prospect of a sea passage to India, led King John II to rename the southern cape Cape of Good Hope, dispelling ancient beliefs of the Indian Ocean's landlocked nature. While some theories suggest Portuguese explorer João Vaz Corte Real's discovery of Newfoundland in 1473, based on later legends and artifacts, the validity of these claims remains contentious among historians. Chapter 4: New Routes to India. The Treaty of Tordesillas acted as a shield for Portugal against direct competition from Spain, enabling Portugal to persist in its exploration and colonization towards the east. Portugal firmly declined Genoese explorer Christopher Columbus's proposal to sail westward to India, twice, in 1485 and 1488. Experts under King John II of Portugal rejected Columbus's plan, deeming his estimation of a voyage distance of 2,400 miles too conservative, particularly after Bartholomew Dias embarked on his expedition to round the southern tip of Africa in 1487. They reasoned that an eastern route would prove more efficient. The successful return of Dias from the Cape of Good Hope in 1488 and Pero da Covala's overland journey to Ethiopia reaffirmed the accessibility of the riches of the Indian Ocean from the Atlantic, setting the stage for a long-anticipated voyage. On July 14, 1497, under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, a small fleet comprising 4 ships and about 170 men set sail from Lisbon under the reign of the new monarch, Manuel I of Portugal. By December, the expedition had surpassed the Great Fish River, reaching uncharted territories for Europeans. Upon entering the Indian Ocean, Vasco da Gama encountered a well-established trading network connecting various ports, culminating in Calicut on May 20, 1498. However, his attempts to negotiate favorable trade terms were hindered by the disparity in the value of goods. Returning to Portugal in triumph 2 years and 2 days later, Gama and his crew became the first Europeans to sail directly from Europe to India. In 1500, a larger fleet led by Pedro Alvarez Cabral was dispatched to India, inadvertently making landfall on the coast of Brazil, thereby establishing Portugal's claim to the region. Continuing their exploration, Cabral's fleet reached Madagascar in 1501 and Mauritius in 1507, while Lourenço de Almeida landed in Sri Lanka in 1506. The establishment of trading posts in Kochi and Calicut in 1501, followed by Goa in 1502, marked the inception of the Portuguese presence on the Asian continent. Expanding their reach, the Portuguese ventured eastward from India, integrating into the existing Indian Ocean trade network that linked Calicut and Quilon in India with Southeast Asian ports, including Malacca and Palembang. In 1511, Afonso de Albuquerque seized Malacca, a pivotal center of Asian trade, and dispatched diplomatic missions further east, including the first European envoy to the Kingdom of Siam, signaling Portugal's growing influence in the region. The Maluku Islands, notably the Banda, played a pivotal role in the discovery of the elusive Spice Islands, previously shrouded in mystery to Europeans. Banda stood as the exclusive reservoir of nutmeg and cloves during that era, sparking fervent interest among explorers. The Portuguese, driven by a desire to access these prized islands, directed their Indian Ocean expeditions toward this goal. Under Albuquerque's command, Antonio de Abreu led an expedition to Banda in early 1512, charting a course through Java and the Lesser Sunda Islands. Their historic arrival marked the first European contact with the region, navigating through Buru, Ambon, and Ceram en route to Banda. Subsequently, Abreu voyaged to Malacca while his deputy, Francisco Cerro, ventured to Ambon and tragically foundered off Ternate. Despite this setback, Cerro managed to secure permission to establish the fort of São João Baptista de Ternate, laying the foundation for Portuguese influence in the Malay archipelago. Among the Portuguese emissaries, Jorge Alvarez reached China in May 1513, paving the way for subsequent interactions. Rafael Perestrello, a relative of the renowned Christopher Columbus, achieved the distinction of becoming the first European explorer to land on the southern shores of mainland China, engaging in trade in Guangzhou in 1516. Leading a Portuguese vessel with a crew sourced from a Malaccan junk that journeyed from Malacca, Perestrello's endeavors marked a significant milestone in cross-cultural exchanges. In 1517, Fernão Pires de Andrade fostered trade relations with Canton, further solidifying Portuguese presence in China. However, tensions escalated, culminating in the battles of Tunman and Chikawan in 1521 and 1522 respectively, resulting in Chinese victories. Notably, the Chinese seized Portuguese breech-loading swivel guns during these skirmishes, reverse engineering the technology and dubbing them Fulongji guns, reflecting the Portuguese moniker attributed to them. Despite initial hostilities, peace between the Portuguese and the Chinese ensued over the ensuing decades, leading to the Portuguese acquisition of Macau in 1557 under Chinese approval. In 1507 and 1515, Afonso de Albuquerque seized control of Muscat and Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, respectively, solidifying Portuguese dominance and monopolizing trade routes in the region. Moreover, he fostered diplomatic ties with Persia, expanding Portugal's influence in the Middle East. While embarking on a campaign to conquer Aden in 1513, an expedition led by Albuquerque navigated through the Red Sea via the Bab al-Mandab, ultimately landing on Cameron Island. Further extending Portuguese authority, an expedition led by Antonio Correa successfully captured Bahrain in 1521, initiating nearly 80 years of Portuguese rule over the Gulf Islands. Until 1541, when Estevão da Gama's fleet ventured as far as Suez in the Red Sea, Massawa remained the northernmost point frequented by the Portuguese. In 1543, 3 Portuguese merchants stumbled upon Japan, becoming the first Westerners to trade with the island nation by chance. According to accounts from Fernão Mendes Pinto, a purported member of the expedition, they landed in Tanegashima, where their advanced weaponry left a lasting impression on the Japanese, who swiftly adopted and mass-produced such armaments. Under Philip II of Spain's authorization, Andrés de Urdaneta was tasked with leading an expedition to invade the Philippines. However, Urdaneta declined the role of commander, prompting Miguel López de Legazpi to assume leadership. Setting sail on November 15, 1564, the expedition eventually reached its destination. Following a period spent on the islands, Legazpi dispatched Urdaneta to scout for a more favorable return route. Departing from San Miguel Cebu on June 1, 1565, Urdaneta ventured as far north as 38 degrees latitude in search of favorable winds. Urdaneta hypothesized that the Pacific trade winds, akin to those in the Atlantic, followed a circular pattern. Drawing inspiration from the Volta do Mar route used in the Atlantic, he navigated far north before veering eastward, eventually reaching the coast of Cape Mendocino, California. Subsequently, the ship charted a course southward, finally arriving in Acapulco on October 8, 1565, after an arduous journey spanning 12,000 miles over 130 days. Only Urdaneta and Felipe de Salcedo, López de Legazpi's nephew, possessed the strength to anchor the ship following the loss of 14 crew members. This successful voyage paved the way for the establishment of a cross-Pacific Spanish route between Mexico and the Philippines, utilized by Manila galleons for centuries to facilitate trade between China, the Americas, and Europe, bridging the gap between the trans-Pacific and transatlantic trade routes. Chapter 5: The Dutch in New Zealand and Australia. The concept of Terra Australis Ignota, meaning the unknown land of the South in Latin, captivated European cartographers from the 15th to the 18th centuries, stemming from Aristotelian theories. This mythical continent featured prominently on maps of the era, notably on Dieppe maps in the mid-16th century, where its coastline was depicted just south of the East Indian Islands. Cartographers adorned these maps with elaborate details, fostering a wealth of imaginative information. Despite explorations narrowing down potential locations for the continent, debates over its existence persisted, with figures like Gerardus Mercator and Alexander Dalrymple arguing for it as late as 1767. As new regions were discovered, they were often speculated to be part of this elusive southern landmass. In 1576, Juan Fernandez laid claim to the discovery of the southern continent during his voyage from Chile, adding to the intrigue surrounding Terra Australis. Luis Vaz de Torres, a navigator under the Spanish crown, furthered exploration in the region by proving the existence of a southern route, now known as Torres Strait, south of New Guinea in 1606. Similarly, a Portuguese navigator in Spanish service identified a vast island south of New Guinea, which he named La Australia del Espiritu Santo, though it turned out to be part of modern-day Vanuatu, not Australia. Dutch navigator Willem Janszoon embarked on his third journey to the East Indies in 1603, commanding the Dufkin, or Dujefkin, meaning little dove, as part of a larger fleet. Tasked with seeking new trade routes, Janszoon sailed from Bantam to the western coast of New Guinea in 1605. Venturing into the Gulf of Carpentaria, he inadvertently bypassed Torres Strait and landed on the western shore of Cape York in Queensland in 1606, marking the first recorded European landing on Australian soil. Believing the coastline to be an extension of New Guinea, Janszoon charted a significant stretch before his return. Subsequent expeditions, such as the rounding of Cape Horn by Jacob Le Maire and Willem Schouten in 1615, dispelled misconceptions about Tierra del Fuego, confirming it as an island rather than a part of Terra Australis. Abel Tasman, a Dutch merchant and explorer under the employ of the Dutch East India Company, embarked on a groundbreaking expedition from 1642 to 1644, during which he sailed around New Holland, debunking the notion that Australia was a mere extension of the mythical southern continent. Tasman's voyage also marked the first documented European encounter with Van Diemen's Land, known today as Tasmania, along with New Zealand and the Fiji Islands. During this remarkable journey, Tasman, along with his skilled navigator Vischer and merchant Gilsmans, meticulously charted significant portions of Australia, New Zealand, and various Pacific islands, contributing invaluable knowledge to European understanding of these distant lands. Tasman's exploration played a pivotal role in reshaping the geographical perceptions of the Southern Hemisphere, paving the way for further expeditions and discoveries in the region. Chapter 6: Russian Explorations. In the mid-16th century, the Russian Tsardom expanded its dominion by subduing the Tatar Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, extending its control from the Volga region to the foothills of the Ural Mountains. Spearheading the colonization of these newly acquired territories were the influential Stroganov merchants, who played a pivotal role in the eastward push of the Russian frontier. Recognizing their contributions, Tsar Ivan IV granted Anarchy Stroganov vast estates in the Urals, along with tax exemptions to facilitate large-scale migration to the region. Establishing themselves in the Urals, the Stroganovs diversified their activities, engaging in agriculture, hunting, salt production, fishing, ore extraction, and trade with indigenous Siberian tribes. Sensing the need for protection against the raids of Siberian Khan Kuchum, Anarchy's sons, led by Semyon Stroganov, enlisted the services of a Cossack leader named Yermak around 1577. By 1580, the Stroganovs and Yermak devised a strategic initiative to launch a military expedition into Siberia to confront Khan Kuchum directly. In 1581, Yermak embarked on his journey deep into Siberia, engaging in a series of decisive battles against the Khan's forces. The pinnacle of his campaign came in 1582 with a resounding victory at the three-day Battle of Chuvash Cape on the banks of the Irtysh River, where Kuchum's main army was vanquished. Following this triumph, Yermak seized control of the Siberian Khanate, including its capital, Kashlik. However, Kuchum, still formidable, launched a counterattack in 1585, resulting in a devastating blow to Yermak's forces. Despite being wounded, Yermak attempted to evade capture, but tragically succumbed while crossing the Wage River. Although the Cossacks were compelled to retreat from Siberia, Yermak's exploration of the region's waterways facilitated subsequent Russian expeditions, allowing them to reclaim lost territory within a few years. During the turbulent period known as the Time of Troubles, internal strife within Russia temporarily halted the eastward expansion of the Russian territories in the early 17th century. However, the exploration and settlement of Siberia's vast expanse quickly resumed, primarily led by Cossack adventurers driven by the lucrative fur and ivory trade. While the Cossacks ventured through the southern Urals, another wave of Russian settlers arrived via the Arctic Ocean. These were the Pomors, seafaring people from the northern regions of Russia, who had long engaged in fur trading with Mangazaya in northern western Siberia. In 1607, the settlement of Turukhinsk emerged near the mouth of the lower Tunguska on the northern banks of the Yenisei River, while Yeniseiski Ostrog was established in 1619 near the mouth of the upper Tunguska on the mid-Yenisei. Between 1620 and 1624, a group of fur hunters under the leadership of Demid Pyanda embarked on an expedition to explore the lower Tunguska, covering a remarkable distance of 1,430 miles, 2,301 kilometers, and spending winters along the Vilyui and Lena rivers. According to later folklore, Pyanda is credited with the discovery of the Lena River, journeying approximately 1,500 miles, 2,414 kilometers, along its course into central Yakutia. He then traversed to the Angara River, navigating it for 870 miles, 1,400 kilometers, until reaching Yeniseisk, thereby confirming that the Angara and Upper Tunguska were one and the same. In 1627, Pyotr Beketov assumed the position of Yenisei Voivoda in Siberia, becoming the first Russian to venture into Buryatia. Beketov successfully led an expedition to collect taxes from the Zabaikali Buryats and established the first Russian settlement in the region, Rybinski Ostrog. Subsequently, in 1631, Beketov was tasked with exploring the Lena River, where he founded Yakutska in 1632. He dispatched his Cossack forces to further explore the Aldan River and downstream areas of the Lena, construct additional outposts, and enforce tax collection. Yakutska swiftly evolved into a pivotal hub for Russian expeditions venturing into the eastern, southern, and northern territories. Maxim Perfilayev, a key figure in the establishment of Yeniseisk, founded Bratsky Ostrog along the Angara River in 1631. Venturing further, Perfilayev embarked on a journey from Yakutska in 1638, marking the first Russian exploration into Transbaikalia. In 1639, an expedition led by Ivan Moskvatin achieved a significant milestone by becoming the first Russians to reach the Pacific Ocean and uncover the Sea of Okhotsk. They established a winter camp at the mouth of the Yulia River, gaining valuable insights from the indigenous peoples about the expansive Amur River to the south. Expanding their exploration in 1640, the Cossacks ventured southward, charting the southeastern coastline of the Okhotsk Sea, potentially reaching the Amur River's mouth and possibly stumbling upon the Shantar Islands during their return journey. Kurbat Ivanov is credited with crafting the first Russian map of the Far East in 1642, as documented by Moskvatin. In 1643, Vasily Poyarkov crossed the formidable Stanovoy Range, reaching the upper Zia River in the Dors territory, where tribute was being paid to the Manchu Chinese. Continuing his journey, Poyarkov descended the Zia, and after wintering, became the first Russian to reach the Amur River in 1644. Sailing downstream, he eventually reached the river's estuary, marking a significant geographical discovery. However, due to conflicts with local villagers, Poyarkov and his Cossacks were compelled to take an alternate route back. They constructed boats and sailed along the Sea of Okhotsk's coast to the Yulia River, where Ivan Moskvatin had established winter shelters 6 years earlier. Finally, they returned to Yakutska in 1646, concluding their remarkable expedition. In 1644, Mikhail Stadukin founded Srednyakolimsk upon his discovery of the Kolyma River, marking a significant milestone in Siberian exploration. Fedot Alekiev Popov, a prominent merchant, spearheaded a new expedition aimed eastward, with Semyon Desnyov assuming command of one of the Kochi vessels. Departing from Srednyakolimsk in 1648, they navigated the Arctic waters and successfully circumnavigated Cape Desnyov, thus becoming the pioneering explorers to traverse the Bering Strait, unveiling the lands of Chukotka and the Bering Sea. However, they encountered fierce storms and conflicts with indigenous peoples, resulting in the loss of all their vessels and the majority of their crew, including Popov himself. In 1649, a resilient crew led by Desnyov reached the mouth of the Anadyr River, where they established Anadyrsk after salvaging materials from the wreckage. Stranded in this remote outpost, they were eventually discovered by Stadukin, who had journeyed overland from Kolyma. Embarking on a southern expedition in 1651, Stadukin ventured as far as Penjin Bay on the northern coast of the Okhotsk Sea, potentially exploring the western shores of Kamchatka in the process. Yerofey Khabarov undertook the second Russian exploration of the Amur River between 1649 and 1650. Charting a course through the Oyakma, Tungur, and Shilka rivers, he reached Amur, Darya before returning to Yakutsk. Subsequently, Khabarov launched a more robust expedition in 1650 to 1653, facing staunch resistance along the Amur River. Despite challenges, he established winter quarters at Albazan and pressed onward to Achansk, prevailing against formidable forces of Dorian, Manchu Chinese, and Korean adversaries. His mapping efforts culminated in the draft of the Amur River, contributing to the Russian occupation of the Amur region, until territorial changes were delineated by the Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689. Following in the footsteps of Semyon Desnyov, Kurbat Ivanov assumed leadership of Anadyrsky Ostrog from 1659 to 1665. Embarking from Anadyr Bay, Ivanov charted a course to Cape Desnyov in 1660, where he meticulously mapped Chukotka and the Bering Strait. Notably, Ivanov's cartographic endeavors depicted Wrangel Island, the Diomede Islands, and Alaska, providing invaluable insights based on indigenous knowledge acquired from Chukotka inhabitants. By the mid-17th century, Russian explorers had largely defined the country's borders, extensively charting Siberia's vast expanses. While some regions, notably eastern Kamchatka and certain Arctic territories, remained unexplored, subsequent endeavors led by Vladimir Atlasov and the Great Northern Expedition in the early 1700s would further expand Russia's geographical knowledge, culminating in the conquest of Kamchatka and the comprehensive exploration of the Arctic coastline and Alaska from 1733 to 1743. Chapter 7. The Impact of the Discoveries. The Columbian Exchange, coined in honor of Columbus, emerged from the era of European expansion across the globe, facilitating the convergence of the Old and New Worlds. Spanning the 16th to the 18th centuries, this exchange ignited a global silver trade, catalyzing European involvement in Chinese porcelain commerce. It involved the transference of goods and resources across hemispheres. Europeans introduced livestock, such as cattle, horses, and sheep to the Americas, while receiving staples like tobacco, potatoes, tomatoes, and maize in return. Furthermore, pivotal commodities in global commerce included tobacco, sugarcane, and cotton from the Americas, alongside the influx of gold and silver from the New World to Europe and beyond. The age of imperialism dawned with the establishment of new transoceanic connections and the subsequent expansion of European influence during the Age of Discovery. Over time, European colonial powers asserted dominion over vast swaths of the world's territories. The quest for trade, resources, colonies, and labor precipitated profound repercussions globally. In their colonization of the Americas, European powers subjugated indigenous nations and cultures, imposing forced conversions and cultural assimilation efforts. Coupled with the introduction of diseases from Europe, these events triggered a devastating decline in the indigenous American population. Scholar Peter C. Mancall encapsulated indigenous perspectives on European colonization, noting the sorrow, displacement, and despair it wrought upon Native Americans. Across regions like North America, Central America, Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina, indigenous peoples endured displacement and exploitation, often reduced to marginalized minorities. Likewise, in West and East Africa, indigenous states succumbed to the demands of European slave traders, reshaping the socio-political landscape and fundamentally altering the dynamics of slavery across the continent. These changes reverberated throughout African societies and economies, extending far inland from the coastal regions. Indigenous communities thrived in North America during that era, and their presence endures today. Encounters between Europeans and Native Americans were marked by frequent conflicts. European settlers possessed several advantages over the indigenous populations, introducing them to diseases previously unknown to them, resulting in catastrophic population declines ranging from 50 to 90%. During the 16th century, the Portuguese introduced maize and manioc to Africa, fundamentally altering local agricultural practices. These New World crops supplanted indigenous African staples, becoming indispensable dietary components. The widespread cultivation of maize, manioc, and other introduced crops contributed to population growth, particularly in regions targeted by slave traders seeking laborers. The Ming dynasty of China thrived on commerce with European powers such as the Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch during the global silver trade spanning the 16th to 18th centuries. Although silver circulated worldwide, a significant portion flowed into China, where it dominated imports. China received an average of 100 tons of silver annually between 1600 and 1800, with concentrations particularly high in regions like the lower Yangtze. The bulk of this silver originated from mines in Mexico and Peru, with over 30% finding its way to China via European merchants. Japan also played a key role in this trade, aggressively exporting silver to China and beyond during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The influx of silver transformed China's economy, supplanting traditional mediums of exchange like copper and paper bills. However, towards the latter years of the Ming dynasty, the flow of silver into China dwindled due to various factors, including the onset of the Little Ice Age, agricultural disruptions, natural disasters, and epidemic outbreaks. These challenges weakened the Ming economy and eroded central authority, paving the way for rebel leaders like Li Zicheng to challenge Ming rule. The introduction of new crops from the Americas to Asia by Spanish colonizers in the 16th century played a significant role in the region's demographic growth and agricultural diversity. While silver constituted a substantial portion of China's imports, the Chinese also embraced New World crops from the Spanish Empire. Sweet potatoes, maize, and peanuts, crops adaptable to regions unsuitable for traditional Chinese staples like wheat, millet, and rice, contributed to the expansion of China's population. With the emergence of sweet potatoes around 1560, a shift occurred from rice, previously the primary staple during the Song dynasty, to sweet potatoes, particularly among the lower socioeconomic classes. The Nanban trade era commenced in 1543 with the arrival of the Portuguese in Japan, bringing with them a wealth of technological advancements, cultural influences, and trade opportunities. Acting as intermediaries between China and Japan due to Chinese restrictions on direct trade, the Portuguese facilitated the exchange of goods, including Chinese silk for Japanese silver. This silver, highly valued in China, fueled a cycle of trade wherein the Portuguese leveraged Japanese silver to acquire more Chinese silk. However, the establishment of a Spanish commercial base in Manila by 1573 shifted the dynamics of trade, leading to a decline in Portuguese intermediary activities. Despite this, Japan's substantial silver exports to China remained pivotal in global trade during the 16th to 18th centuries, contributing significantly to China's economic vitality and international trade networks. Matteo Ricci, an Italian Jesuit, holds the distinction of being the inaugural European to step foot into the Forbidden City. Beyond mere exploration, Ricci left an indelible mark on Chinese society, imparting knowledge on spinet construction and music, facilitating cross-cultural exchange through translation work, and engaging in collaborative mathematical studies with his Chinese counterpart, Xu Guangqi. This intellectual collaboration symbolized a pivotal moment in the history of East-West interactions. Meanwhile, the flow of global luxury goods into European markets via maritime routes reshaped the economic landscape, rendering previous European trade hubs stagnant. The ascendancy of Atlantic trade routes displaced the dominance of Italian and German trading powers, reliant on Baltic, Russian, and Islamic connections. Europe's appetite for sugar, spices, silk, and Chinaware fueled social and economic transformation across the continent. With the economic pendulum swinging away from the Mediterranean, Antwerp emerged as the epicenter of Europe's commercial activity, earning the title of the hub of the entire international economy. The Dutch Golden Age, which had its origins in Antwerp before moving to Amsterdam, coincided with the Age of Discovery, reflecting the symbiotic relationship between exploration and economic prosperity. Pepper-laden Portuguese vessels, among others, docked in Antwerp's bustling ports, stimulating an economy characterized by diverse foreign influence and a policy of religious toleration that attracted a sizable Orthodox Jewish community. In the Far East, Portuguese traders navigated the waters to establish trading missions on China's Shangchuan Island by 1549. Through diplomatic negotiations, they secured a pivotal port treaty in 1557, formalizing Macau as an official Portuguese commercial outpost. Gaspar da Cruz, a Portuguese friar, contributed significantly to the European understanding of China and the Ming Dynasty, with his comprehensive book covering various aspects of Chinese society, culture, and governance. This literary work served as a bridge between the East and the West, fostering deeper cultural exchange and mutual understanding during this period of burgeoning globalization. Chinese silk and porcelain, meticulously crafted to cater to European tastes, served as the cornerstone of China's export industry. In Europe, the exquisite Chinese porcelain was so highly esteemed that it became synonymous with the term China in English, reflecting its prestige and desirability. Among the earliest Chinese porcelain to grace European shores was the cracked porcelain, named after the Portuguese carracks that transported it across the seas. Initially accessible only to the affluent elite, cracked porcelain found its way into Dutch still life paintings, symbolizing luxury and sophistication. During the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company fostered a flourishing trade with the East, importing an astonishing 6 million porcelain items from China to Europe between 1602 and 1682. The impeccable craftsmanship of Chinese artisans left a lasting impression on Europeans, spurring attempts to replicate Chinese porcelain elsewhere. In Florence, the creation of Medici porcelain from 1575 to 1587 marked the first successful endeavor to emulate Chinese porcelain techniques. Following disruptions in the supply chain after the demise of the Wanli Emperor in 1620, Dutch potters began earnest attempts to replicate Chinese porcelain. The iconic cracked porcelain, especially renowned for its blue and white designs, served as a model for artisans worldwide. From Arita, Japan, to Persia, where Dutch merchants sought alternatives after the fall of the Ming Dynasty, and eventually in Delftware, crack-inspired pottery proliferated. Simultaneously, Spanish official Antonio de Morga chronicled the vast array of Ming China's traded goods during the late 16th and early 17th centuries in his comprehensive inventory. His writings underscored the boundless variety and richness of Chinese products, reflecting the allure and fascination they held for traders and consumers alike across the globe. By Kelly Mass. Summaries from History. Chapter 1. Columbus in the Bahamas. Castile, the Iberian rival of Portugal, commenced its dominance over the Canary Islands in 1402, situated off the West African coast. However, its attention was divided by internal Iberian politics and the defense against Islamic invasions and raids throughout the 15th century. With the consolidation of the Castilian and Aragonese crowns towards the end of the century, a nascent modern Spain became singularly focused on exploring new trade routes beyond its borders. The Crown of Aragon wielded significant maritime influence in the Mediterranean, boasting territories in eastern Spain, southwestern France, key islands like Sicily and Malta, and control over the kingdoms of Naples and Sardinia, extending its reach as far as Greece. In 1492, the joint monarchs achieved the conquest of Granada, a Moorish kingdom that had long provided Castile with African goods in exchange for tribute. Subsequently, they decided to sponsor Christopher Columbus's voyage, aiming to bypass Portugal's monopoly on West African sea routes and reach the fabled Indies, comprising East and South Asia, by sailing westward. Columbus had previously proposed the idea to King John II of Portugal, twice, in 1485 and 1488, both times facing rejection. Departing from Palos de la Frontera on the evening of August 3, 1492, Columbus embarked on his expedition with 3 vessels, the Santa Maria, known as Gallega, the Galician, and 2 smaller caravels, Pinta, the Painted, and Santa Clara, nicknamed Nina. After resupplying in the Canary Islands, Columbus set sail on a 5-week voyage across the Atlantic, traversing the Sargasso Sea. On October 12, 1492, Columbus sighted land, believing he had reached the East Indies, and named the island San Salvador, one of the islands in what is now the Bahamas, though its exact identity remains debated. By December 5, Columbus had also explored the northeastern coast of Cuba, where he made landfall on October 28, and the northern coast of Hispaniola. He was cordially received by the native cacique Guacanagari, who permitted him to leave behind several of his crew members. Columbus left 39 men in present-day Haiti to establish the colony of La Navidad. He seized between 10 to 25 indigenous individuals and transported them back to Spain before departing. However, only 7 or 8 of these native individuals survived the arduous journey to Spain, yet their presence left an enduring impression on the city of Seville. Upon his return, adverse weather conditions compelled him to seek refuge in Lisbon on March 4, 1493. After a week in Portugal, he resumed his journey to Spain and reached Barcelona on March 15, 1493, where he delivered his report to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. The news of his remarkable discoveries swiftly spread across Europe. In contrast to Africa or Asia, the Caribbean inhabitants had little to offer the Castilian ships initially, disappointing Columbus and other Spanish explorers. Consequently, the focus shifted towards colonization efforts in the islands. Spain only found the riches it sought upon the discovery of the continent. To avert conflict between the Spanish and the Portuguese, a division of influence became imperative shortly after Columbus's return from what later became known as the West Indies. On May 4, 1493, 2 months following Columbus's return, the Catholic monarchs received a bull, Inter Caetera, from Pope Alexander VI, decreeing that all lands west and south of a line 100 leagues west and south of the Azores or the Cape Verde Islands should belong to Castile, along with all mainlands and islands associated with India. This declaration excluded Portugal, leaving it unable to lay claim to newly discovered lands east of the designated boundary. This arrangement sparked discontentment in King John II of Portugal, who deemed his allotted territory insufficient, hindering his ambition of reaching India. Consequently, he promptly negotiated with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain to expand the western boundary, thereby permitting him to claim regions newly discovered east of it. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas, a pivotal agreement dividing the globe between Portugal and Spain, was ratified. Portugal was granted dominion over territories situated to the east of a line drawn 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, which were already under Portuguese control, and the islands stumbled upon by Christopher Columbus during his initial expedition, known as Cipangu and Antilla in the treaty, later identified as Cuba and Hispaniola. This accord bestowed upon Portugal authority over regions encompassing Africa, Asia, and eastern South America, particularly Brazil. Conversely, the Spanish were allocated territories west of this delineated line, predominantly Castile. This pact effectively partitioned the known world of Atlantic islands, with the division line situated approximately midway between the Portuguese Cape Verde and the Spanish discoveries in the Caribbean. In 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral encountered what is now recognized as the Brazilian coastline, initially mistaking it for an expansive island. Being situated to the east of the designated division line, Cabral asserted Portuguese sovereignty over the land, a claim that was acknowledged by the Spanish. Cabral navigated through a corridor established by the treaty, as Portuguese vessels ventured west into the Atlantic in search of favorable winds for voyages to India. Some theorists speculate that the Portuguese had clandestinely uncovered Brazil prior to Cabral's arrival, which prompted the eastward adjustment of the line and subsequently led to Cabral's discovery, although conclusive evidence supporting this remains elusive. Other accounts suggest that Duarte Pacheco Pereira clandestinely encountered Brazil in 1498, yet conventional historians refute this assertion. Subsequently, the Spanish domain was found to encompass extensive swaths of the North and South American continental landmasses, notwithstanding Portuguese-controlled Brazil's expansion beyond the prescribed boundary and the colonization efforts of other European nations, which disregarded the stipulations of the treaty. Chapter 2: Discoveries in Brazil. Due to the geographical delineation, rather than actual territorial control, Europeans had only explored a fraction of the divided area. Following Christopher Columbus's pioneering voyage in 1492, several explorers embarked on westward expeditions starting from 1497. In 1497, the newly crowned King Manuel I of Portugal dispatched an expeditionary fleet eastward, continuing the quest initiated by his predecessor to find a passage to the Indies. News of the Portuguese reaching the true Indies spread rapidly in July 1499, conveyed to the Spanish Catholic monarchs merely a day after the triumphant return of the fleet. Columbus's third journey in 1498, centered on the island of Hispaniola, marked the onset of the inaugural successful Castilian-Spanish settlement in the West Indies. Despite growing doubts, Columbus steadfastly maintained that he had indeed reached the Indies. During this voyage, he ventured upon the mouth of the Orinoco River along the northern coast of South America, present-day Venezuela, deducing from the copious freshwater flow that he must have encountered a continental landmass, which he presumed to be part of the Asian mainland. As maritime traffic between Seville and the West Indies intensified, knowledge of the Caribbean islands, Central America, and the northern coastline of South America expanded. In 1499 to 1500, one such Spanish vessel, commanded by Alonso de Ojeda and Amerigo Vespucci, made landfall on the coast of present-day Guyana, where their paths seemingly diverged. In July 1499, Vespucci ventured southward, discovering the mouth of the Amazon River and progressing as far as 6 degrees south in contemporary northeastern Brazil before retracing his course. At the outset of 1500, Vicente Yáez Pinzón found himself unexpectedly diverted by a tempest. By January 26, 1500, he reached the northeastern shores of present-day Brazil, venturing as far south as what is now the state of Pernambuco. His vessel was the inaugural to navigate the estuary of the Amazon River, which he christened Rio Santa Maria de la Mar Dulce, St. Mary's River of the Sweet Sea. The territory lay beyond the eastern bounds for Castilian claim, as per the Treaty of Tordesillas. However, the revelation ignited their curiosity, prompting a follow-up expedition led by Pinzón in 1508, a voyage that traced the northern coastline to the Central American mainland in pursuit of an eastern passage, and another in 1515-16 helmed by Juan Diaz de Solís, a crew member on the 1508 excursion. Rumors of Portuguese ventures in the area spurred the 1515-16 journey, further elaborated below. Unfortunately, it met an untimely end when de Solís and several crew members vanished while exploring a river by boat on the River Plate. Nevertheless, their discoveries reignited Spanish interest, leading to colonization efforts commencing in 1531. In April 1500, the Second Portuguese India Armada, under the command of Pedro Álvares Cabral and accompanied by skilled captains such as Bartolomeu Dias and Nicolau Coelho, chanced upon the Brazilian coastline. As the Armada veered westward across the Atlantic, executing a substantial volta du mar to circumvent potential calms in the Gulf of Guinea, they sighted a peak on April 21, 1500, which they named Monte Pascual. Cabral made landfall on April 22, and by the 25th of April, the entire fleet anchored at Porto Seguro, a name they bestowed upon the site, signifying safe harbor. Recognizing the newfound land east of the Tordesillas demarcation line, Cabral dispatched a messenger to Portugal, carrying missives detailing the discovery, including one composed by Pero Vaz de Camina. He christened the land Ilha de Vera Cruz, believing it to be an island of the True Cross. Some historians speculate that the Portuguese might have encountered the South American bulge earlier while navigating the Volta do Mar, potentially explaining King John II's insistence on shifting the demarcation line westward in 1494, hinting that their arrival in Brazil was not entirely fortuitous. However, John's motives could have been solely driven by the desire to expand Portuguese territorial claims in the Atlantic. Subsequently, the fleet veered eastward from the eastern coast to resume its voyage toward the southern tip of Africa and India. Cabral spearheaded the pioneering voyage that interconnected Europe, Africa, the New World, and Asia, earning him the distinction of being the first navigator to set foot on 4 continents. Amerigo Vespucci, a native of Florence, employed by a division of the Medici Bank in Seville from 1491, where he organized maritime expeditions and accompanied Juan de la Cosa twice to the Guianas under the patronage of Spain, participated as an observer in exploratory voyages to South America's eastern coast at the invitation of King Manuel I of Portugal. Between 1502 and 1504, 2 reports attributed to him suggested that the newly discovered lands were not part of the Indies, but constituted a distinct new world, the Mundus Novus, a concept also espoused in a contemporary document titled in Latin as such, based on Vespucci's correspondence with Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, which gained widespread popularity across Europe. This realization quickly dawned that Columbus had indeed stumbled upon an entirely new continent, the Americas, rather than reaching Asia. The cartographers Martin Waldseemüller and Matthias Ringmann thus christened the landmass as the Americas in 1507, likely in homage to Amerigo Vespucci. Among the Portuguese expeditions, one led by Goncalo Coelho and/or André Goncalves or Gaspar de Lemos, embarked on a southward journey along the South American coastline to the vicinity of present-day Rio de Janeiro from 1501 to 1502. According to Amerigo Vespucci's account, the expedition ventured to the South Pole at latitude 52 degrees south, penetrating into the chilly latitudes of southern Patagonia, perhaps near the Strait of Magellan, before retracing its course. Vespucci described their voyage as following a lengthy, unbroken coastline, likely tracing the contours of southern South America. However, discrepancies arise in his narrative, as he later amended part of his description in a subsequent letter, indicating a shift from approximately 32 degrees south, southern Brazil, to a south-southeasterly direction toward the open sea, while maintaining that they reached 50 degrees, 52 degrees south. Whether this alteration stemmed from his own volition or was prompted by pressure from King Manuel's censors to obscure sensitive information disclosed to Lorenzo de' Medici and the public remains a subject of debate. Bernat Palmier de Gonville undertook one of the earliest French, Norman, and Breton voyages to Brazil in 1503, challenging Portuguese maritime dominance. Intent on reaching the East Indies, his vessel was redirected westward by a storm toward the Cape of Good Hope, ultimately landing on January 5, 1504, in present-day Santa Catarina, southern Brazil. Portuguese captains João de Lisboa and Estevão de Froy embarked on an expedition to the River Plate estuary in modern-day Uruguay and Argentina from 1511 to 1512, voyaging as far south as the present-day Gulf of San Matias at 42 degrees south, as documented in the Nieuwen Zeitung als Presselend, translating to New Tidings from the Land of Brazil. In their expedition, the crew reached a promontory stretching from north to south, christening it the Cape of Santa Maria, Punta del Este, retaining the name of the nearby cape. Beyond the 40 degrees south mark, They encountered another promontory jutting into the sea, along with a vast gulf in June and July. Sailing around the Cape for approximately 300 kilometers, 186 miles, they caught sight of the continent on the opposite side and steered northwest, only to be thwarted by an incoming storm. Buffeted by the tramontane, or north wind, they were forced to retrace their course. This journey also marked the first communication with the interior, specifically the Inca Empire, introducing them to the concept of the White King and the people of the mountains. Additionally, they presented a silver axe, acquired from the Chara natives during their return journey to the coastal regions of Brazil and westward along the coast and the River Plate estuary, as a gift to King Manuel I Christopher de Haro, a Sephardic Flemish who, along with D. Nuno Manuel, financed the expedition. Later speculated that the navigators had stumbled upon a southern passage connecting the west to Asia. The famed Portuguese explorer, Ferdinand Magellan, spearheaded an expedition dispatched by the Spanish crown in 1519 with the aim of discovering a passage to Asia. Venturing along the South American coastline, the fleet meticulously mapped rivers and bays until it finally found a route to the Pacific Ocean through what is now known as the Strait of Magellan. Aleixo Garcia, a Portuguese conquistador believed to have been associated with the 1516 Soles voyage, led a private expedition comprising around 2,000 Guerin Indians between 1524 and 1525. Utilizing the Pibiru, an indigenous trail network, they traversed the regions of present-day southern Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia. Notably, they became the first Europeans to navigate the Chaco region and reach the distant reaches of the Inca Empire, nestled in the Andean foothills around Sucre. Chapter 3: West and East Routes. In 1513, approximately 40 miles, 64 kilometers south of Acan, in present-day Colombia, Spanish explorer Vasco Nez de Balboa received surprising accounts of a golden sea, sparking his curiosity. Accompanied by 190 Spaniards, a handful of indigenous guides, and a pack of dogs, Balboa undertook a daring journey across the Isthmus of Panama, armed with minimal provisions and insights provided by local leaders. Navigating along the coastline in a small brigantine, accompanied by 10 native canoes, the expedition made strategic landings. Reinforcements of 1,000 troops joined them on September 6, engaging in numerous skirmishes, traversing dense forests, and scaling mountain ranges along the Chuquianac River, until they caught sight of the distant expanse of this other sea. Balboa pressed onward, and on the morning of September 25, he became the first European to glimpse or reach the Pacific from the New World, marking a historic milestone. Descending to the shore for a brief reconnaissance, they became the inaugural Europeans to set foot on the Pacific coast of the New World. Designating the harbor where they landed as San Miguel after a journey spanning over 110 kilometers, 68 miles to the south, Balboa bestowed upon the newly discovered sea the name Mar del Sur, South Sea. His primary objective was to uncover realms abundant in gold, leading him through indigenous territories to the islands, where he christened the largest one Isla Rica, Rich Island, now known as Isla del Rey. The group was dubbed Archipelago de las Perlas, Pearl Archipelago, a name that persists to this day. By 1516, a cohort of Portuguese navigators had congregated in Seville to serve the newly crowned Charles I of Spain, despite their previous allegiances to King Manuel I of Portugal. Notable figures such as explorers Diogo and Duarte Barbosa, Estevão Gomes, Jucero, and Ferdinand Magellan, along with cartographers Jorge Reinel and Diogo Ribeiro, cosmographers Francisco and Rui Falero, and Flemish merchant Christopher de Haro, participated in this endeavor. Ferdinand Magellan, who had voyaged to India under the Portuguese flag until 1513 when he reached the Maluku Islands, proposed the hypothesis that the islands fell within Spain's Tordesillas territory. This theory was upheld through ongoing correspondence with Francisco Cerro, who resided there. Magellan pitched his ambitious plan to King Charles I of Spain, who was already informed about Spain's endeavors to discover a western route to India. The king, along with Christopher de Haro, generously funded Magellan's expedition. Assembling a fleet, Spanish navigators, including Juan Sebastián Elcano, were recruited to partake in this daring venture. Departing from Seville on August 10, 1519, the expedition comprised 5 ships. The lead vessel Trinidad, commanded by Magellan, along with San Antonio, Concepcion, Santiago, and Victoria. The crew, consisting of approximately 237 men from diverse European origins, aimed to reach the coveted Maluku Islands by navigating westward, thereby asserting Spain's economic interests and territorial claims. Navigating southward, the fleet skillfully circumvented Portuguese territories in Brazil, eventually becoming the first to arrive at Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost tip of the Americas. Departing from Cape Virginus on October 21st, they embarked on a grueling passage through a 373-mile, 600-kilometer strait, christened Estrecho de Todos los Santos by Magellan, now known as the Strait of Magellan. On November 28th, 3 ships emerged into the serene waters of the Pacific Ocean, aptly named Mar Pacífico for its tranquil appearance. Despite encountering numerous challenges, including the loss of Magellan in the Battle of Mactan in the Philippines, the mission pressed forward. Under the leadership of Juan Sebastián Elcano, the journey was completed in 1521, with the arrival at the Spice Islands. The return leg saw Victoria reaching Spain on September 6, 1522, marking the historic accomplishment of the first circumnavigation of the globe. Remarkably, only 18 of the original crew members who set sail on 5 ships survived the arduous journey and returned to Spain aboard the Victoria under Elcano's command. Additional survivors trickled into Spain over the following years, including those captured by the Portuguese in Cape Verde and others from the Trinidad. Antonio Pigafetta, a Venetian scholar and avid traveler, who had earnestly requested to join the expedition and served as Magellan's meticulous assistant, meticulously documented the voyage, providing a valuable primary source of information. Spain obtained invaluable geographical knowledge from this historic circumnavigation, which played a pivotal role in the subsequent exploration and colonization of the Philippines. Although the route discovered by Magellan's expedition did not offer a practical alternative to the Portuguese route around Africa, as the Strait of Magellan was situated too far south, and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean posed significant challenges for a single journey from Spain, it provided crucial insights. Leveraging this newfound information, subsequent Spanish voyages ventured into the Pacific, uncovering navigational routes that facilitated trade between Acapulco, New Spain, present-day Mexico, and Manila, Philippines. Tragically, Magellan met his demise during a skirmish, succumbing to a poisoned arrow. Reacting swiftly, the Portuguese sought to capitalize on the survivors of Magellan's expedition, establishing a fort in Ternate shortly thereafter. In 1525, Charles I of Spain authorized a fresh expedition to the west, with the intent to colonize the Maluku Islands, claiming them to fall within the ambit of the Tordesillas Treaty Zone. Led by Garça Jofre de Losa, the expedition comprised 7 ships and 450 crew members, including prominent Spanish navigators such as Juan Sebastián Elcano and Losa himself, both of whom perished at sea, alongside the young Andrés de Urdaneta. During the voyage, one of the ships, driven off course by a fierce storm in the Strait of Magellan, ventured as far south as 56 degrees south, where the crew believed they had reached the edge of the world, marking the first crossing of Cape Horn. Following a protracted journey, the expedition eventually arrived at Tidor, yet conflict with the Portuguese, who had established a stronghold in nearby Ternate, proved inevitable, leading to a decade-long series of skirmishes. With the Tordesillas line lacking a defined eastern boundary, both Spain and Portugal engaged in diplomatic negotiations to address the issue. Over the span of 1524 to 1529, representatives from both nations convened at Barajas Elvas to determine the precise location of the Tordesillas anti-meridian, which would delineate the world into 2 equal halves. Despite the involvement of esteemed scholars, astronomers, and cartographers, including Lopo Hamam from Portugal and Diogo Ribeiro from Spain, agreement proved elusive due to the limitations of contemporary navigational technology. Ultimately, in 1529, the dispute was resolved with the signing of the Treaty of Zaragoza, which assigned the Maluku Islands to Portugal and the Philippines to Spain, bringing an end to the prolonged contention. Between 1525 and 1528, Portugal launched 3 expeditions to explore the Maluku Islands. Led by the governor of Ternate, Jorge de Menezes, Gomes de Sequeira, and Diogo de Rocha embarked on a northward journey, becoming the first Europeans to set foot on the Caroline Islands, which they dubbed Islands de Sequeira. In a separate voyage, Jorge de Menezes ventured to the islands of Biak and Waigeo in Papua New Guinea in 1526. These endeavors sparked speculation about Portuguese discovery of Australia, with historian Kenneth MacIntyre suggesting that Cristóvão de Mendonça and Gomes de Sequeira may have been involved in this discovery. In 1527, Hernán Cortés commissioned a voyage to explore the South Sea, Pacific Ocean, entrusting his cousin Álvaro de Saavedra Serrán with the mission. Departing from New Spain on October 31, 1527, Saavedra sailed across the Pacific, reaching the northern shores of New Guinea, then referred to as Isla de Oro. By October 1528, one of his ships had arrived at the Maluku Islands. Encountering unfavorable northeast trade winds on his attempted return to New Spain, Saavedra redirected his course southward. He navigated back to New Guinea, then veered northeast, passing through the Marshall Islands and the Admiralty Islands before being unexpectedly driven back to the Moluccas by the winds for a third time. This challenging westward return route remained elusive until 1565, when Andrés de Urdaneta finally identified it. Chapter 4: The Spanish Conquistadors. By 1511, Spain became aware of rumors circulating about undiscovered islands northwest of Hispaniola, prompting King Ferdinand II of Aragon to take measures to curb further exploration. While the Portuguese made significant strides in the Indian Ocean, the Spanish directed their attention to exploring inland territories in search of gold and other valuable resources. These expeditions, led by individuals known as conquistadors, comprised a diverse array of participants, including artists, merchants, clergy, lawyers, minor nobility, and even some freed slaves. Many of them supplied their own equipment or received credit in exchange for a share of the profits, lacking formal military training, but often possessing prior expedition experience. Upon encountering indigenous civilizations in the Americas, comparable in size and complexity to those in Europe, Spanish conquistadors often formed alliances with indigenous groups who harbored grievances against dominant powers. Once Spanish authority was established and a lucrative revenue source secured, the Spanish crown aimed to replicate governmental and religious institutions from Spain in the New World. The spiritual conquest, achieved through Christian conversion, emerged as an early focal point. The newly acquired economy revolved around the encomienda system, wherein Spanish conquerors extracted tribute and forced labor from the indigenous populations. The discovery of vast silver reserves in Mexico and Peru reshaped not only the colonial economies, but also the global economic landscape, propelling the Spanish Empire to prominence as a major global power. High-value crops from the Americas became integral components of global trade networks, while the influx of silver from Spanish America became a driving force in the world economy. Throughout this era, epidemics of European diseases, such as smallpox, wreaked havoc among the indigenous populations, leading to widespread devastation. In 1512, King Ferdinand incentivized Juan Ponce de León to explore new territories, rewarding him for his earlier discovery of Puerto Rico in 1508. The promise of governance over newly discovered lands awaited Ponce de León, albeit at his own expense. Departing from Puerto Rico in March 1513 with 3 ships and around 200 crew members, they reached land in April, naming it La Florida under the misconception that it was an island, inspired by the Easter season. Though the exact landing site between St. Augustine, Ponce de León Inlet, and Melbourne Beach remains debated, they continued their southward journey. On April 8, they encountered the powerful Gulf Stream, a phenomenon that would later become a vital route for ships traveling from the Spanish Indies to Europe. Continuing along the coast, they made stops at Biscayne Bay and the Dry Tortugas, before setting course southwest in an attempt to circumnavigate Cuba, finally arriving at Grand Bahama in July. In 1517, Governor Diego Velázquez de Cuellar of Cuba dispatched a fleet to explore the Yucatan Peninsula, led by Hernández de Córdoba. Welcomed by the Mayans upon their arrival at the coastline, they were unexpectedly ambushed during the night, resulting in heavy casualties. The expedition was subsequently undertaken by Velázquez's nephew, Juan de Grijalva, who ventured south along the coast to Tabasco, a territory within the Aztec domain. In 1518, Velázquez extended an invitation to Hernán Cortés, the mayor of Cuba's capital, to lead an expedition aimed at securing Mexico's interior. However, due to a long-standing feud between them, Velázquez revoked the charter. Undeterred, Cortés proceeded independently in February 1519, landing in Mayan territory in Yucatan with a fleet of 11 ships, 500 men, 13 horses, and a handful of cannons, asserting Spanish sovereignty over the region. Advancing from Trinidad to Tabasco, Cortés engaged in combat with the local inhabitants, emerging victorious. Among the captives was Morena La Malinche, who, with her proficiency in both Nahuatl and Maya languages, became an invaluable interpreter and advisor to Cortés, providing crucial insights into the prosperous Aztec Empire. By July, Cortés had seized control of Veracruz and pledged allegiance to Spain's new monarch, Charles I, placing himself directly under the king's command. Cortés persistently sought an audience with Aztec Emperor Montezuma II, but his requests were declined. Journeying towards Tenochtitlan, they forged alliances with numerous tribes along the way. In October, they marched upon Cholula, the second-largest city in central Mexico, accompanied by approximately 3,000 Tlaxcaltec allies. There, they ruthlessly slaughtered hundreds of unarmed nobles gathered at the central plaza and inflicted partial destruction upon the city, either to instill fear in the awaiting Aztecs or, as Cortés later claimed, to deter potential treachery. Upon their arrival in Tenochtitlan on November 8, they were warmly received by Moctezuma II, who deliberately allowed Cortés to penetrate deep into the heart of the Aztec Empire, aiming to glean insights that could be exploited later for their downfall. The emperor showered them with lavish gifts of gold, tempting them to seize large fortunes. Cortés, in his correspondence with King Charles, claimed that he learned of the Aztecs' belief that he was either an emissary of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, or Quetzalcoatl himself, a contention disputed by some historians. However, upon discovering that his troops had been ambushed on the shore, Cortés opted to seize Moctezuma and confine him within his palace, demanding a ransom as tribute to King Charles. Meanwhile, Velázquez dispatched a fresh expedition to confront Cortés, led by Panfilo de Narváez, which arrived in Mexico in April 1520 with 1,100 soldiers. Leaving behind 200 men in Tenochtitlan, Cortés marched to confront Narváez, whom he defeated and persuaded to join his cause. A massacre, orchestrated by one of Cortés' subordinates within the great temple of Tenochtitlan, incited a local uprising. Hastening back, Cortés sought Moctezuma's aid, only to find that the Aztec ruler had been assassinated, presumably by his own people. During the harrowing Noche Triste, the Spanish fled to Tlaxcala, narrowly escaping as their rear guard was decimated. Amidst this chaotic retreat, much of the plundered treasure was lost. They eventually reached Tlaxcala after a skirmish in Otumba, having suffered the loss of 870 soldiers. Subsequently, Cortés launched an assault on Tenochtitlan, capturing its leader, Cuauhtémoc, in August 1521, with the assistance of allies and reinforcements from Cuba. With the collapse of the Aztec Empire, Cortés claimed the city for Spain, renaming it Mexico City. In 1522, Pascual de Andagoya ventured on the initial expedition to explore the western reaches of South America. Natives divulged tales of a region rich in gold along the Pir River, motivating Andagoya's journey. However, his exploration was cut short due to illness upon reaching the San Juan River in Colombia. Returning to Panama, Andagoya propagated rumors of the fabled Pir, later known as El Dorado. These rumors, coupled with Hernán Cortés' purported successes, captured the attention of Francisco Pizarro. Accompanied by Francisco Pizarro, during his traverse of the Panama Isthmus, Balboa had sowed the seeds of ambition in Pizarro's mind. By 1524, Pizarro had forged an alliance with priest Hernando de Luque and soldier Diego de Almagro to venture southward, each with a role to play in the endeavor. Pizarro assumed command, Almagro provided military and logistical support, and Luque managed finances and supplies under the banner of the Empresa del Levante. Embarking on their first expedition to conquer Peru on September 13, 1524, with approximately 80 soldiers and 40 horses, the mission faltered, reaching only Colombia before succumbing to inclement weather, scarcity of provisions, and clashes with hostile locals. Ports along their route, such as Puerto Deseado, Desired Port, Puerto del Hambre, Hunger Port, and Puerto Quemado, Burn Port, bore witness to the challenges they faced. Undeterred, they launched a second expedition in August 1526, armed with 2 ships, 160 men, and several horses. Upon reaching the San Juan River, Pizarro stayed to explore the marshy coastline, while Almagro returned for reinforcements. Capturing a raft from Tumbes laden with treasures, their resolve was reignited. Battling fierce winds and currents, they arrived at Atacames, encountering a vast native population under Inca influence but refrained from landing. As Almagro and Luque sought reinforcements, Pizarro remained cautious near the coast. Despite the governor's refusal to sanction a third expedition, Almagro and Luque eagerly joined forces with Pizarro. On Isla de Gallo, Pizarro drew a symbolic line, presenting a choice to his companions. There lies Peru with its wealth, and here is Panama with its poverty. Let each brave Castilian choose. 13 steadfast men, known as the famous 13, opted to remain. Taking refuge on La Isla Gorgona for 7 months, they awaited replenishment of their supplies. Choosing to venture southward, they reached the northern Peruvian Tumbes region in April 1528, where they were warmly received by the local Tumpas. Among Pizarro's crew, 2 men reported encountering vast riches, including gold and silver adornments adorning the chief's dwelling. Witnessing llamas for the first time, Pizarro likened them to small camels. Impressed by the Spaniards' fair complexion and gleaming armor, the indigenous people bestowed upon them the title of Children of the Sun. Returning to Panama, they readied themselves for a final expedition, charting a course through newly discovered territories named Cabo Blanco, Peta, Sechura, Punta de Auja, Santa Cruz, and Trujillo, eventually reaching the 9th degree south. In the spring of 1528, Pizarro journeyed to Spain, where he secured an audience with King Charles I. Upon learning of Pizarro's exploration of gold and silver-rich regions, the king pledged his support. The Capitulation de Toledo granted Pizarro the authority to press on with his conquest of Peru. Rallying many of his kin and acquaintances to his cause, including his brothers Hernando, Juan, and Gonzalo Pizarro, as well as Francisco de Orellana, who would later navigate the Amazon River, and his cousin Pedro Pizarro. Setting sail on December 27, 1530, Pizarro embarked on his third and final voyage from Panama to Peru. Arriving near Ecuador with 3 vessels and 188 soldiers, they made their way to Tumbes, only to find the city in ruins. Venturing inland, they established San Miguel de Piura, the inaugural Spanish settlement in Peru. A messenger returned bearing an invitation from an Incan envoy. Amidst the turmoil following the fall of his brother Huáscar, Inca Atahualpa had been stationed in northern Peru. After a 2-month march, they reached Atahualpa's encampment. Despite the Incan leader's refusal to submit to Spanish demands, citing that he would be no man's tributary, Pizarro, commanding a mere 200 soldiers against Atahualpa's 80,000 troops, launched an assault, prevailing in the Battle of Cajamarca and capturing Atahualpa in what became known as the ransom chamber. Although Atahualpa fulfilled his promise of filling 1 room with gold and 2 with silver, he was accused of fratricide and conspiracy against Pizarro, ultimately meeting his demise by execution. In a letter addressed to King Charles I in 1533, Pizarro marveled at the grandeur of Cuzco, declaring it the most magnificent city he had ever encountered in the Indies or his homeland of Spain. He expressed admiration for its exquisite architecture, deeming it exceptional even by Spanish standards. Following the Spanish conquest of Peru, the provisional capital was established in the fertile Mantaro Valley, where Jauja was erected. However, due to its lofty mountain location, it proved impractical. Recognizing the need for a more suitable administrative center, Pizarro laid the foundations of Lima on January 18, 1535, considering it one of his most significant endeavors. Chapter 5: North American Explorations. The Treaty of Tordesillas, along with Pope Alexander VI's allocation of Spanish riches in the New World, held no sway beyond the Iberian Peninsula among other European nations. France, the Netherlands, and England, with their extensive maritime histories, had a tradition of privateering. Despite barriers imposed by Iberia, advancements in technology and cartography swiftly spread northward. The religious and political schism deepened when Henry VIII of England, unable to obtain papal approval to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon after failing to produce a male heir, broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England. Concurrently, the Netherlands sought both political autonomy and religious freedom from Catholic Spain, leading to the outbreak of the 80 Years' War in 1568, as the Dutch revolted against Spanish rule under Philip II. Philip II, inheriting Portugal's throne in 1580, unified the crowns, creating a formidable Catholic power that England and the Netherlands perceived as a threat. His army seized strategic trade hubs like Bruges and Ghent during the Dutch struggle for independence, culminating in the fall of Antwerp in 1585. Before departing, the Protestant populace was granted a 2-year grace period to reconcile their differences, prompting many to migrate to Amsterdam. This influx included skilled artisans, prosperous merchants, and religious refugees, notably Sephardi Jews from Portugal and Spain, as well as Huguenots from France. The Pilgrim Fathers also briefly sojourned there, before voyaging to the New World. This mass migration fueled Amsterdam's rapid ascension from a minor port in 1585 to a global commercial powerhouse. Despite the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, which bolstered maritime trade, the threat of the English Armada underscored Spain's naval dominance over emerging rivals. The ascendancy of Dutch maritime prowess unfolded swiftly and impressively. Dutch sailors, long serving as proficient navigators and adept cartographers during Portuguese expeditions to the east, laid the groundwork for their own maritime endeavors. In 1592, Dutch merchants dispatched Cornelis de Houtman to Lisbon, aiming to glean insights into the Spice Islands. Meanwhile, Jan Huygen van Linschoten, after extensive voyages in the Indian Ocean under the Portuguese banner, penned the Reisgeschrift van Navigation der Portugeloisers in Orienten, in Amsterdam, in 1595, offering invaluable guidance on navigating the treacherous routes between Portugal and the East Indies, including Japan. Following these instructions, Houtman embarked on the inaugural Dutch exploration voyage, charting a new maritime course from Madagascar to the Sunda Strait in Indonesia, and forging diplomatic ties with the Sultan of Banten. This newfound knowledge ignited fervent interest among the Dutch and British, sparking a wave of commercial expansion and prompting the establishment of chartered companies in England, 1600, and the Netherlands, 1602. In defiance of Portuguese hegemony, Dutch, French, and English vessels set sail, challenging the Portuguese monopoly, particularly along coastal routes where Portuguese resistance faltered against the collective might of these seafaring nations. The quest for maritime routes to Asia also spurred a series of French and English expeditions to explore North America. Led by the Venetian John Cabot and sanctioned by Henry VII of England in 1497, these early forays into North America were bolstered by the contributions of mariners from the Italian peninsula, notably Christopher Columbus. Spain, preoccupied with its conquests in central Mexico and Peru and the discovery of silver, directed scant attention to the northern reaches of the Americas. While earlier European ventures sought an elusive northwest passage, It wasn't until the early 20th century that such a route was uncovered. Nonetheless, Northern European colonists began establishing settlements along the east coast of North America in the early 17th century. In the early 1520s, Portuguese explorer João Alvarez Fagundes, accompanied by settlers from mainland Portugal and the Azores, explored Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, potentially reaching the Bay of Fundy on the Minas Basin. Establishing a fishing colony on Cape Breton Island, their presence endured until the late 16th century or even beyond. In 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano embarked on a voyage commissioned by Francis I of France, motivated by the desire to challenge the dominance of the Portuguese and Spanish. Verrazzano, an Italian explorer, charted a course along the Atlantic coast of North America, from South Carolina to Newfoundland, becoming the first European to set foot in what would later become the Virginia colony and the United States. Around the same time, Estevão Gomes, a Portuguese cartographer who had sailed with Ferdinand Magellan, ventured into Nova Scotia, then traversed southward through Maine to New York Harbor, the Hudson River, and eventually Florida by August 1525. Gomes's expedition significantly contributed to the mapping of the east coast of North America, as evidenced by the 1529 Diogo Ribeiro globe map. Between 1534 and 1536, French explorer Jacques Cartier, possibly a companion of Verrazzano in previous expeditions to Nova Scotia and Brazil, undertook an inland exploration of North America. Cartier's journeys led him to explore the Gulf of St. Lawrence, ultimately claiming the territory for Francis I of France and establishing early European presence in what is now Canada. In the mid-16th century, exploration efforts turned towards the Pacific coast. Francisco de Ulloa, a Spanish explorer, navigated the Pacific coast of present-day Mexico, including the Gulf of California, conclusively determining that Baja California was a peninsula rather than an island. Despite Ulloa's findings, the misconception of California as an island persisted in Europe, fueled by earlier reports. It was during Ulloa's expedition that the term California was first documented. Subsequently, João Rodrigues Cabrillo, a Portuguese navigator serving the Spanish crown, became the first European to step onto California's shores, landing at San Diego Bay on September 28, 1542, and asserting Spanish claims over the region. Cabrillo's journey extended further north, with his crew continuing exploration as far as Oregon after his demise, including stops at San Miguel Island and Point Reyes on the mainland. In 1579, Francis Drake, the English privateer, navigated the coast north of Cabrillo's earlier landing during his historic circumnavigation of the globe. Drake, renowned as a valiant figure among the English and a fearsome adversary to the Spanish, had carved a reputation through successful raids on Spanish settlements in the Caribbean and mainland America. While Drake played a pivotal role in the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, his subsequent attempt to dislodge the Spaniards from the Caribbean met failure. During his voyage, Drake briefly anchored at South Cove, Cape Arago, near Coos Bay, Oregon, on June 5, 1579, before setting sail southward in search of a suitable haven to repair his vessel. On June 17 of the same year, Drake and his crew made landfall on the Pacific coast of what is now Northern California, near Point Reyes, where they discovered a sheltered cove. Naming the area Nova Albion or New Albion in homage to Queen Elizabeth I of England, Drake left an etched metal plate asserting sovereignty for the Queen and her successors, marking his claim to the territory. These landfalls along the western coast of North America formed a significant segment of Drake's circumnavigation, a historic journey he completed between 1577 and 1580 as the first captain of his own ship. Drake met his demise in 1596 off the coast of Panama due to injuries sustained during a raid. In the early 17th century, Henry Hudson, an English mariner sailing under the Dutch East India Company (VOC), embarked on a series of expeditions exploring the region around present-day New York City. Hudson's voyages were motivated by the quest for a western route to Asia, following previous attempts to find a northeast passage to India. While investigating the Hudson River, Hudson laid the groundwork for Dutch colonization in the area. His final expedition ventured northward in search of the elusive Northwest Passage, leading to the discovery of the Hudson Strait and Hudson Bay. However, Hudson's plans were thwarted when his crew mutinied, leaving him adrift after a winter spent at James Bay. As the realization dawned that direct sea routes to Asia through Africa or South America were unattainable, European powers redirected their focus to northern waterways. Exploration of the Arctic shores of North America and Russia gained momentum, fueled by the ambition to locate a navigable route. While early Russian explorers, known as the Pomors, had been probing parts of this route since the 11th century, it was not until 1525 that the concept of a potential seaway connecting the Atlantic and Pacific was officially proposed by the diplomat Gerasimov. In 1553, Hugh Willoughby and chief pilot Richard Chancellor embarked on a daring voyage with 3 ships under the patronage of London's Company of Merchant Adventurers, aiming to uncover a new route to uncharted territories. Willoughby's journey across the Barents Sea hinted at the presence of northern islands, leading to the depiction of Willoughby's land on maps by renowned cartographers such as Plancius and Mercator until the mid-17th century. However, fierce whirlwinds in the Norwegian Sea drove the ships apart, with Willoughby's vessel seeking refuge in a cove near the Finnish-Russian border. Tragically, Russian fishermen stumbled upon the frozen crew, including Captain Willoughby and his journal, a year later. The Company of Merchant Adventurers underwent a transformation, evolving into the Muscovy Company, following Chancellor's successful anchoring in the White Sea and his overland journey to Moscow to meet with Ivan the Terrible's court. In June 1576, Martin Frobisher, an intrepid English mariner, led an expedition funded by the Muscovy Company to seek a northwest passage around North America. Despite the loss of one ship to storms and the forced return of another, Frobisher and his crew reached the Labrador shore in July. Their arrival at what is now Frobisher Bay prompted Frobisher to name it after himself, believing it to be the gateway to a northwest waterway. Claiming Baffin Island for Queen Elizabeth, Frobisher's exploration contributed significantly to early Canadian history. Subsequent journeys in 1577 and 1578, however, failed to discover the anticipated passage, tarnishing Frobisher's reputation when ore brought back to England was found to be worthless. In 1594, Dutch cartographer Willem Barents embarked on a voyage from Texel with 3 ships, aiming to uncover the Northeast Passage above Siberia. Encountering a polar bear on William's Island for the first time, the crew managed to bring it aboard, only for the creature to wreak havoc and meet its demise. Barents's journey took him to the west shore of Novaya Zemlya, before formidable icebergs forced a retreat, marking another chapter in the quest for Arctic exploration. Prince Maurice of Orange appointed him as the chief navigator for a forthcoming expedition comprising 6 ships loaded with trade goods that the Dutch intended to exchange with China the following year. During their voyage, the expedition encountered indigenous Samoyed individuals, but upon realizing that the Kara Sea was frozen, they decided to retreat. In 1596, the States General offered a substantial reward to anyone who could successfully navigate the Northeast Passage. Guided by Barents, the Town Council of Amsterdam financed and equipped 2 small vessels, helmed by Jan Rijp and Jacob van Heemskirk, to embark on the quest for this elusive route. Setting sail in May, they discovered Bear Island and Spitsbergen in June, reaching the northwest coast of the latter. Navigating into the northern entrance of Foreland Sundet, which they named Keerwick, they were compelled to turn back due to shallow waters. On June 28, they passed the northern tip of Prins Karl's Foreland, naming it Vogelhoek due to the abundance of birds, before journeying southward, passing Isfjorden and Belsund, which they labeled Grooten Inwick and Inwick on their charts. On July 1st, the ships returned to Bear Island, where a dispute arose. They eventually split up, with Barents heading northeast and Rijp heading north. In an attempt to evade ice formations, Barents ventured into Novaya Zemlya and aimed for the Vagot Strait but became trapped amidst icebergs and floes. The 16-member crew found themselves stranded, necessitating a winter spent on the ice. constructing a shelter named Het Behouden Huis from salvaged wood. They utilized merchant materials to fashion additional clothing and blankets, as well as crude traps to capture Arctic wildlife for sustenance. Afflicted by scurvy, the surviving crew members embarked on 2 small boats in June, when the ice still held firm around their ship. Sadly, on June 20, 1597, Barents passed away while examining charts at sea. It took the boats an additional 7 weeks to reach Kola, where they were rescued by a Russian merchant vessel. Only 12 crew members remained upon their arrival in Amsterdam in November. Jan Huygen van Linschoten, who had accompanied Barents on the initial 2 expeditions, and Gerrit de Veer, the ship's carpenter on the 3rd journey, later published their expedition journals. In 1608, Henry Hudson made a second endeavor to traverse Russia, aiming to find a passage through to the east, but his efforts were in vain. Although he reached Novaya Zemlya, he encountered obstacles that forced him to abandon the mission and turn back. Undeterred by his previous setback, between 1609 and 1611, Hudson embarked on a new expedition sponsored by the Dutch East India Company, VOC. Tasked with seeking a western route to Asia, Hudson explored the vicinity of what is now known as New York City. This voyage marked a departure from his earlier ventures conducted on behalf of English merchants who sought a potential northern sea route to India.